The air at Monza was thick with the scent of high-octane fuel and damp asphalt, a perfume only the truly initiated could appreciate. For Max Verstappen, it was the smell of a battlefield, not the track itself, not anymore. The real war was fought in the hushed, air-conditioned hospitality suites, where smiles were as sharp as razor blades and every handshake came with a hidden price. The Italian Grand Prix was a crucible of pressure, a stage where legends were made and reputations unraveled. Max knew this better than anyone. It wasn't just about the championship anymore, it was about something far bigger. A quiet corruption had begun to fester at the heart of the sport, and she was starting to feel its cold, clammy grip. It had all started with the new regulations. On the surface, they were about parity and sustainability, noble goals that everyone could get behind. But Max, with her razor-sharp political instincts, saw the truth beneath the polished veneer. The regulations weren't designed to level the playing field. They were crafted to ensnare a select few, namely, her and her team. They were a perfect, legally binding trap, designed to curb her dominance, not with superior engineering, but with bureaucratic red tape. The architect of this gambit, of course, was Toto Wolff. He was a master of the backroom game, a man who could turn a casual conversation into a strategic weapon. His team, tied to the old guard of the sport, had a vested interest in seeing the new order dismantled. Lando, their star driver, was the public face of this new political push. He was a charming, eloquent rival who seemed to embody everything the sport wanted to be: marketable, clean, and fiercely competitive. But Max knew better. She knew that Lando's easy smile hid a steel-trap mind and a deep-seated loyalty to the elite power structures he represented. His rivalry with her wasn't just about racing. It was a proxy war for control of the sport's future. Max stood in her team's motorhome, a stark, sterile space that felt a world away from the carnival outside. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, a sharp contrast to the roar of the engines she'd just heard on the track. She was reviewing the data from the morning's practice session, but her mind wasn't on tire degradation or DRS zones. It was on the meeting she had scheduled for that afternoon, the big one, the one with Toto. Her team principal, a man who'd been a mentor and a friend, had warned her against it. "He's just trying to get a rise out of you, Max. Don't fall for it," he'd said, his voice laced with concern. But Max knew this was more than a mind game. This was a challenge, and she had never been one to back down. She pulled on a light jacket, the team's logo a familiar comfort on her arm. The journey from her motorhome to the hospitality paddock was a gauntlet of media, fans, and rival team members. She moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, offering brief nods and quick professional smiles. She was a champion, but here she was just another player in a very high-stakes game of chess. The Mercedes hospitality suite was exactly as she'd imagined: minimalist, sleek, and utterly silent. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the paddock, but the world outside felt muted, distant. Toto was waiting for her, sitting at a long, polished table. He rose as she entered, a practiced gesture of respect that felt more like a power play. "Max," he said, his voice as smooth as polished marble, "thank you for coming." "Toto," she replied, her voice firm, unwavering. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Let's get straight to it. I know what you're doing." He didn't flinch. Instead, he offered her a seat. "Doing? My dear, I don't know what you mean. We're simply working to ensure the sport remains fair and competitive for everyone. The new regulations are an important step in that direction." Max settled into the chair, the cool leather a stark contrast to the heat of the day. "Spare me the corporate jargon, Toto. You and I both know the new regulations are a backdoor attempt to kneecap us. They're designed to force us to compromise our design philosophy, to slow us down by a few tenths. And it's not for the good of the sport. It's to give your team an edge you can't earn on the track. A flicker of something, surprise, irritation, crossed his face before it smoothed back into his usual mask of unflappable calm. That's a rather bold accusation, isn't it? Without a shred of evidence, I might add. The evidence is right there in the data, Max shot back, leaning forward slightly. The simulations, the wind tunnel results, even the track telemetry from yesterday. The new aerofloor regulations are disproportionately impacting us. And when you factor in the proposed budget cap penalties, it's clear. It's not a coincidence. It's a targeted strike. Toto leaned back, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. You're a racer, Max. A brilliant one, perhaps the best of your generation. But this is not your world. This is about politics, about the future of the sport. We're simply making a strategic move to ensure a more equitable distribution of success. It's what the fans want, what the sponsors demand. He was trying to dismiss her, to put her back in the box of just a driver. It was the same old tactic, and it filled Max with a quiet rage. He saw her as a pawn in his game, a simple piece to be moved and outmaneuvered. He didn't see her as an equal. He didn't see her as a threat. And that, she knew, was his first mistake. You're right, Toto, Max said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. This isn't my world. It's yours. You and Lando, with all your connections and power. You think you have all the cards. You think you can use the system to your advantage because you helped build it. But you forget something. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy between them. I'm not a part of your system. I'm an outsider, and outsiders, Toto, can see the rot that you've grown too accustomed to. He laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Rot? That's a strong word. We're building a dynasty, Max. We're creating a legacy. No, Max countered, shaking her head. You're building a fragile house of cards, Toto. One that relies on smoke and mirrors and the illusion of control. And here, in Monza, I'm going to show the world just how weak your foundations truly are. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. Toto's smile vanished completely. The gauntlet had been thrown. The game had truly begun. He had sought to humiliate her, to put her in a corner. But Max had just revealed that she had a brilliant, brutal truth of her own, one that he had not seen coming. He had thought he was a chess master, but he had just walked into a checkmate. What he was about to discover was that Max was not just a player. She was the one who could rewrite the rules of the game. Toto's smile didn't just vanish. It evaporated. The carefully constructed mask of detached arrogance he wore every day cracked, revealing a sliver of genuine surprise, a sliver of genuine concern. For a fleeting moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had just been checkmated in a game he thought he was winning effortlessly. The silence that followed Max's declaration was more deafening than 1,000 screaming engines. That's a very dangerous accusation, Max, he said, his voice now lower, losing its polished smoothness. It was a warning, a threat thinly veiled as a piece of advice. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on hers. Are you prepared to back up a claim like that? Because if you're not, the consequences could be severe, not just for you, but for your team, for your reputation. Max didn't flinch. She met his gaze directly, her own eyes holding a fire that was both coolly strategic and fiercely personal. She was no longer just the driver, she was the architect of a new kind of justice. Are you prepared for me to? I have no doubt the consequences will be severe. The question is, who for? He scoffed, but the sound lacked its usual conviction. You're an excellent racer, Max, but you're in over your head. You don't know how this works. You don't have the influence, the connections, the long-term vision. This isn't about one team. It's about the entire ecosystem of the sport. We're creating a more competitive future, a legacy of parity, and you're trying to stand in the way of progress. Progress for whom, Toto? Max retorted, her voice a quiet, precise instrument cutting through his grandiose pronouncements. Progress for your team? You've had your time. The sport has moved on. The people you represent, the old guard, they've had decades to build their empires. Now, when an outsider comes in and disrupts the system, you resort to backroom deals and politically motivated regulations. You're not building a better future, you're trying to turn back time. He leaned back, a new expression on his face. Not one of anger, but of cold, calculating pity. You're a wonderful story, Max. The fierce young lioness, the underdog. But the truth is, you're alone. The sport is bigger than any one driver, and it's certainly bigger than any one team. You're fighting a losing battle, and all you'll achieve is to alienate yourself. You'll go from being the most celebrated champion to a disgruntled pariah. Max rose from her chair, her movement graceful but firm. She didn't need to argue with him anymore. The conversation had already served its purpose. He had shown her the full extent of his dismissive arrogance, his belief that she was an insignificant pawn. He thought her lack of connections was a weakness. He thought she was alone. And that, she knew, was the one truth he had fundamentally wrong. "You're right about one thing, Toto," she said, her back to him as she walked towards the exit. "The sport is bigger than any one of us, but justice is bigger than the sport. And it's time to bring a little of it into your world." She didn't wait for his reply, simply pushing open the sleek glass door and stepping back into the cacophony of the paddock. She could feel his eyes on her, a mixture of disbelief and simmering fury. He had come to Monza to put her in a corner, to force her into a humiliating concession. But she had just turned the tables, and now he was the one left to wonder what her next move would be. The motorhome felt different now, no longer a sterile refuge, but a war room. Her team principal, Chris, was waiting for her, his face a mix of concern and anticipation. He'd known her for years, seen her through triumph and defeat, and he knew that when she came back from a meeting like that, the fight had just begun. "How was it?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Max sank into a chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation still buzzing through her veins. "He thinks he has me cornered. He thinks this is a game of political influence, and that he has all the cards. He's so confident in his system that he's blind to its weaknesses." She opened her laptop and pulled up a detailed analysis. "He's right about one thing. We can't beat him at his own game. The regulations are legally airtight. But a legal trap can be undone by a moral truth. The budget cap penalties he's proposed aren't just a hit on us, they're an accounting maneuver, a shell game." Chris leaned in, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The regulations are written to cap spending on development," Max explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard to highlight different sections of the text. "But the wording is deliberately vague. It allows for certain strategic reallocations of funds, things like staff salaries for non-technical roles, marketing campaigns, even luxury hospitality expenses. Things that, for them, are already a huge portion of their budget. But for us, for a team built on engineering and efficiency, they're minimal. They're trying to force us to divert money from our core strength, innovation, into areas that are a drain on our resources. It's not a budget cap. It's a strategic drain, a financial tax on our success." Chris swore under his breath. That's genius. And utterly corrupt. It's the perfect way to handicap us without it looking like they're breaking the rules." "Exactly," Max said, her voice grim. "And Lando, his golden boy, is the face of this. He's out there in the media, talking about fairness and sporting justice, all while his team is orchestrating this backroom maneuver. He's not just a pawn, He's the king's most trusted advisor. The public loves him. He makes it all look so pure. So what do we do? Chris asked, his voice low and urgent. We can't just go to the media and accuse them of corruption without proof. They'll bury us. Max smiled, a thin, strategic curve of her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the look of a predator about to strike. We don't need to accuse them. We're going to use the same tool they're using against us, the media. But we won't be using corporate jargon. We're going to use a simple, brutal, and undeniable truth. We're going to show the world the serpent in their garden, and we're going to let it bite them. Her plan was a masterpiece of political jujutsu. It was based not on a direct attack, but on a subtle, rhetorical maneuver that would force Toto to expose himself. The serpent was a seemingly innocuous piece of data, a single number that, when presented in the correct context, would unravel his entire narrative of fairness and parity. The first step was an interview she had scheduled with a major news outlet. Not a racing-specific one, but a mainstream financial publication. The journalist, a sharp, cynical woman named Elena, was known for her forensic approach to reporting. Max wasn't going to give her a soundbite. She was going to give her a breadcrumb trail. The interview began with predictable questions about the race, about her rivalry with Lando, about the championship. Max answered with her usual professionalism, but with a subtle, underlying tension that Elena, a master of reading people, immediately picked up on. "You've been very vocal about the new regulations, Max," Elena said, her eyes narrowed. "Are you concerned that they're targeting your team's dominance?" "I'm concerned that they're not what they appear to be," Max said, leaning forward slightly. "On the surface, they're about balancing the field. But underneath, there's a deeper story. A story about how power and influence are used to redefine what fairness means." She spoke not as a driver, but as a political analyst. She was direct, engaging, and used language that was easy for anyone to understand. She was telling a story, and she was drawing her audience in. "Let's talk about the budget cap, for instance," Max continued. "Everyone assumes it's about capping what teams spend on their cars. But the regulations are so complex, so full of loopholes, that it becomes about what you don't spend on the car. My team is built on efficiency. Every dollar we spend is a dollar that makes the car faster. Other teams, they have, let's call them legacy expenses. They spend millions on things that have nothing to do with making the car faster on a Sunday. And the new rules, they penalize the former and protect the latter." Elena's eyes lit up. She saw the angle, the story beneath the story. "So you're saying it's not a budget cap for innovation, but a budget cap for inefficiency?" "I'm saying it's a budget cap designed to benefit the teams with the highest non-technical overhead," Max said, a subtle emphasis on the last word. "And a team like ours, with a lean, focused operation, will be disproportionately hurt. It's a strategic tax on efficiency. And what's more, if you look at the financials, you'll see the full story." She didn't name names. She didn't have to. She had just laid out the core of her argument in plain, simple terms. She had taken a complex, bureaucratic mess and simplified it into a compelling narrative of corporate greed versus meritocratic justice. The serpent had been released. The interview was published that evening. The headline, crafted by Elena, was a masterstroke. "Verstappen. The new regulations are a strategic tax on success." It was an immediate sensation. It was a truth delivered not with anger, but with cool, analytical precision. The comments section exploded. Fans and experts alike began to dig, to look at the numbers, to scrutinize the regulations. The conversation shifted overnight from "Max Verstappen is a sore loser" to "Is Toto Wolff orchestrating a backroom coup?" The pressure on Toto was immediate and immense. He was forced to respond. In a hastily arranged press conference, he tried to dismiss Max's claims. He was in his element here, on the big stage, surrounded by cameras. Max is a talented driver, but she's misinformed. The regulations are for the long-term health of the sport. To suggest otherwise is disingenuous. He went on, using all the same jargon Max had so effortlessly dismantled. He talked about sustainable growth, strategic partnerships, and equitable distribution. But it all sounded hollow now. Max's narrative had poisoned his. The serpent was slithering deeper. The final, brutal truth, however, was yet to come. Max had saved her checkmate for a private meeting she had scheduled for the next morning with Lando. He was the most crucial player in all of this. He was the public face of the opposition, the charming, clean-cut rival who was the symbol of everything Toto was fighting for. But Max knew his own fierce sense of justice, his unwavering belief in the purity of the sport. She was going to appeal to that. The meeting was brief, held in a quiet corner away from the prying eyes of the paddock. Lando was his usual charming self, but Max could see a flicker of unease in his eyes. He had read her interview. He had seen the way the narrative was shifting. "Max," he said, offering a warm but cautious smile, "I heard you've been busy." "I have," she replied, her tone respectful but direct. "And so have you, Lando. You've been the face of a political push, and I have to ask you, do you know what you're really fighting for?" He frowned. "I'm fighting for a fair sport, for a chance for everyone to compete on a level playing field." Max nodded. "I believe you. I know you do. But what if you're a part of something that's the opposite of that? What if the field isn't being leveled, but tilted?" She didn't show him data, didn't give him a lecture. She simply told him the story, just as she had told it to the journalist. She explained the strategic tax on efficiency, the quiet corruption in the wording, the shell game in the budget. She watched as the charming mask on his face began to crumble, replaced by genuine shock and a slow-burning anger. She then handed him a small sealed envelope. "This is the financial report of my team from the last 6 months. It's a single, simple document that shows our total spending on non-technical overhead. Compare it to theirs. Just look at the numbers and tell me with a clear conscience that this is what you call a fair fight." She walked away, leaving him standing there, the weight of a terrible truth in his hands. The serpent had found its final target. The hour was at hand, and for Toto Wolff, the brutal truth was about to be exposed, not by a rival, but by his own champion. The sterile silence of the Mercedes hospitality suite was now a cage of seething frustration for Toto Wolff. He paced the length of the room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated movements. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, was in disarray. He had been outmaneuvered. Not on the track, where he could control every variable, but in the political arena he considered his undisputed domain. The worst part was that the strike had come from the one person he had so arrogantly underestimated: Max Verstappen. Her interview had been a masterpiece of rhetorical warfare. She hadn't accused him of anything directly. She had simply laid out a narrative of cause and effect, a logical path that led anyone with a passing interest in finance to the same damning conclusion. And now, the sport was buzzing with talk of a strategic tax. The phrase was a dagger, precise and painful, and it was cutting through his carefully crafted public image. But that was only half the problem. The other half was walking towards his office now, a small sealed envelope held loosely in his hand. Lando. Toto had counted on him. Lando was his champion, the face of his vision, the virtuous hero to contrast with Max's relentless, data-driven pragmatism. He was the perfect pawn, the one who could stand on the moral high ground and make the political machinations look like a quest for justice. The thought of what Max had told him, what she had given him, made Toto's blood run cold. The door to the office opened and Lando stepped inside. The younger driver's usual easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined intensity. He didn't sit down. He simply stood in the center of the room, the envelope now held tightly in his fist. "Lando," Toto said, forcing a smile onto his face. "Good to see you. Don't listen to the noise, all right? Max is just trying to muddy the waters. It's what she does." Lando didn't respond. He just looked at Toto, his eyes searching, questioning. The silence was unbearable. It stretched on, thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, Lando held up the envelope. "What's this, Toto?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Max gave this to me. She said it was a financial report. A simple document that would show me a brutal truth. I haven't opened it yet. I wanted to come to you first." Toto felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He was a master of improvisation, a man who could talk his way out of any corner. But this was different. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a test of trust. He could see the conflict in Lando's eyes, the struggle between his loyalty to the team and his deep-seated belief in the purity of the sport. "It's nothing, Lando," Toto said, his tone dismissive. "Just more of her games. She's trying to drive a wedge between us. She's desperate. Don't fall for it, trust me. We're in this together. We're building a dynasty." Lando's face remained impassive. He slowly began to tear the sealed envelope open. "I'm not falling for anything, Toto. I just want to understand. I'm the one out there defending these regulations. I'm the one who's been the public face of this. I have a right to know what I'm fighting for." As Lando pulled the single sheet of paper from the envelope, a subtle shift occurred in the room's power dynamic. The air thinned, the tension grew. Toto could feel his control slipping away, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. He had relied on Max's image as a fiery, emotional competitor, expecting her to go on a rant. Instead, she had used her sharp political instincts to expose the core of his hypocrisy with a simple, quiet truth. She had known that Lando, a man who valued justice and fair play above all else, would be the one to deal the final, brutal blow. Lando's eyes scanned the document. It was a simple, stark comparison. One column showed the total spending of Max's team on non-technical overhead. The number was low, a testament to their lean, efficient structure. The second column showed the projected spending for Mercedes in the same categories, based on their publicly available financial reports and the new regulatory loopholes. The number was astronomical. The difference was not just a few million, it was a chasm. It was a clear, undeniable picture of a system designed not for parity, but for profit. It was a strategic tax, just as Max had said. Lando's face, which had been a study in calm, slowly contorted with a mix of shock and betrayal. His jaw tightened, and the paper in his hand trembled slightly. The charming, diplomatic Lando was gone, replaced by a man who had just seen the one person he trusted most lie to him. You said this was for parody," Lando whispered, his voice cracking with a mix of hurt and fury. "You said this was for a level playing field. You let me go out there and tell the world that. And all this time, you knew this was about protecting your own bloated structure. You used me to sell a lie." Toto tried to speak, to explain, to rationalize. "It's not what it looks like, Lando. It's business. It's strategy. Max is playing mind games. You have to understand." "I understand everything," Lando cut him off, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. He was no longer the polite, professional driver. He was a man who had just had his sense of justice violated. "You didn't just lie to me, Toto. You lied to the fans. You lied to the sport. You made me a part of a lie." He looked at the financial report in his hand, a single sheet of paper that had just unraveled an entire narrative. He looked at Toto, the man he had once seen as a mentor and a friend. The look in his eyes wasn't just disappointment, it was the look of a fundamental break. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. Lando didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked out of the office, the financial report clutched in his hand. He walked past the silent professional staff, past the polished glass walls, and back into the vibrant, chaotic world of the paddock. He had a race to prepare for, a championship to fight for, but that was no longer his primary concern. His mind was on a single, brutal truth. He had to decide what to do with it. He walked past Max's motorhome, their eyes meeting for a brief electric moment. A silent understanding passed between them. Max knew she had trusted the right person. She knew that Lando's honor, his sense of justice, was more powerful than any political loyalty. Later that afternoon, a new headline broke across every major news outlet and social media platform. It wasn't from Max, it was from Lando. In a direct, unvarnished statement, he announced that he was withdrawing his public support for the new regulations, citing fundamental discrepancies between the stated goals and the actual financial impact on the sport. He didn't name names, he didn't have to. The serpent had just bitten its master. The unveiling was complete. The roar of the crowd at Monza had always been a symphony to Max's ears, a chorus of adulation and anticipation. But that afternoon, it was a different sound. It was the sound of a storm breaking, a collective exhalation of shock and validation. Lando's statement, delivered with an uncharacteristic severity, had hit the paddock like a thunderclap. The meticulously constructed house of cards Toto had built was now a pile of rubble. The world, the sport, and most painfully for Toto, his own champion, had turned against him. Max watched the scene from the cool shade of her motorhome, the chaos unfolding on a giant screen. The media, a pack of wolves sensing blood, were swarming the Mercedes hospitality suite. Lando's declaration was simple, unadorned, and for that reason, utterly damning. He hadn't accused Toto of anything. He had simply exposed a single, undeniable truth, leaving the world to draw its own conclusions. And the world was concluding, with a brutal clarity, that Toto Wolff had orchestrated a strategic betrayal of the sport's core principles. Toto's own face flashed on the screen, a ghost of his usual self. He was a man cornered, a king stripped of his crown. The unflappable composure, the condescending smile, the aura of invincibility, all of it was gone. His world, a universe built on the perception of his own genius, was collapsing in a single, humiliating moment. Max had known this was a possibility. Her brilliance wasn't just in her driving, it was in her ability to see the board. She hadn't just exposed a flaw in the system. She had used a person's honor to tear the system down from the inside. And she had done it with a single sheet of paper and a powerful, brutal truth. Later that evening, after the adrenaline of the day had begun to fade and a tense quiet had fallen over the paddock, Max walked back to the Mercedes hospitality suite. The doors, usually a bustling hub of activity, were now silent. A single, harried-looking security guard stood by the entrance. He looked at her, his eyes full of a strange mix of recognition and unease. "He's not seeing anyone," the guard said, his voice flat. "He'll see me," Max replied, her voice firm but not aggressive. She knew he would. This was the final act, the denouement of their power play. The guard hesitated for a moment, then sighed and opened the door. Toto was alone in his office. He wasn't pacing now. He was slumped in his chair, a half-empty glass of water on the table in front of him. The perfect reflection of the paddock on the glass walls now seemed like a mockery. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time, Max saw not a rival, but a man who had been utterly defeated. "You came to gloat," he said, his voice a low, defeated rasp. Max closed the door softly behind her. "No, Toto, I came to tell you the truth. The one you missed." She didn't sit. She stood across from him, a silent, powerful figure. "You thought you could outsmart me with politics. You thought I was just a racer, a piece on the board. You were so confident in your system that you didn't see the one thing that would bring it down." He didn't respond, just looked at her with hollow eyes. "You're a brilliant strategist, Toto. You saw every angle, every loophole, every way to use the rules to your advantage. But you forgot one thing. Not everyone plays by your rules. Lando has a sense of justice, a core belief in fairness, that you chose to ignore. You assumed his loyalty to you would outweigh his loyalty to the sport. That was your fundamental mistake." "He was naive," Toto muttered, his voice still a dry whisper. "No," Max said, her voice rising slightly with a powerful conviction. "He wasn't naive. He was honorable. You saw honor as a weakness, a vulnerability to be exploited. And because of that, you exposed yourself. The brutal truth wasn't in the financial report. It was in the fact that you were willing to sacrifice the purity of your own champion, the one who believed in you, to protect your own ego and your own structure." He flinched. The words were a direct hit. He had lied to Lando, used him as a pawn, and in doing so, had broken the trust of the one person whose moral compass was strong enough to bring his entire operation down. This wasn't about the regulations, Toto. It was about justice. And justice, unlike your politics, can't be contained by a loophole. It can't be spun in a press conference. It simply exists. And when it's revealed, it burns everything in its path. Max turned to leave. At the door, she paused, one last observation. "You tried to humiliate me. You tried to break me. But you only made me stronger. I didn't just win this race, Toto. I changed the rules of the game." With that, she was gone, leaving him alone in the sterile silence, the reflection of his shattered world on the glass walls. The following day, a formal statement was issued from the governing body. Citing a review of the new regulations and newly discovered financial implications, the body announced the immediate suspension of the rules. The race, however, would still be run. The Monza Grand Prix was more than a sporting event that afternoon, it was a celebration. The crowd cheered Max as she walked to her car, a heroine who had taken on the system and won. The political intrigue, the backroom deals, the emotional turmoil, all of it was over. Now, there was just the track. The lights went out. The roar was deafening. Max drove with a quiet fury, her focus absolute. She wasn't just racing for a championship, she was racing for every person who had ever been told they were a pawn in a game they couldn't win. She raced with the conviction of a woman who had fought for her principles and emerged victorious. She crossed the finish line first, a dominant, powerful win that felt predestined. As she stood on the top step of the podium, bathed in the spray of champagne, she looked out at the sea of cheering fans. She had won. But this time, it was more than just a win. It was a victory for truth. It was a victory for justice. It was a victory for herself. She had come to Monza to be humiliated, but she had left a legend, not just of speed, but of strength. She had outsmarted her opponent with a brutal truth, and in doing so, she had found her true power.